And one summary I sometimes use is that the transformation towards a recovery-focused service, what it involves is the change from seeing people with mental illness experiences as part of the problem to part of the solution. And when you start to see people as part of the solution, firstly, you get really creative. You start thinking, for example, if I want to influence the Houses of Parliament down there, it may not be my agenda of being a influential mental health researcher who goes and says an expert statement. It may be about amplifying the voice of lived experience of people saying, well, when you set policy that focuses very much on risk, that really impacts on my life. That can be a much more powerful statement than a lobbying group from a mental health professional. So you start to develop new possibilities when you open up that space of thinking that people with mental health experience problems may be part of the solution, not the problem. Okay, any other? All right, well that's great. We're at slide 3, so you probably haven't got a list of, so I've got 407 slides. So okay, so the point here, though, I just want to kind of hammer home is that there are 2 distinct meanings of recovery. And so when someone talks about, oh, we do that already, which is the most common response from people undertaking mental health recovery training and so forth, then firstly validate, because people's views are always important. Secondly, help the person to identify which of these 2 meanings of recovery they're talking about when they say, we do that already. And that very process, that journey of recovery for mental health workers, parallels the journey of recovery for people using mental health services. Because what does that journey of recovery for people using mental health services involve? It involves moving from a position of disempowerment to empowerment, moving from a position of being managed to self-managing, moving from a position of hopelessness to hopefulness, and moving from a position of focusing on what I can't do to what I can do. And for many mental health workers, there are direct parallels in their journey of getting what recovery is actually about, and then identifying what they themselves can do to make a difference. And if you like, it's about bringing the person to work. It's about connecting the person with what brought them into mental health service working in the first place. It's exactly that transformation from being a professional to being a person, from being a patient to being a person. And that's not to say the patient identity was irrelevant or wasn't real. That's not to say the professional identity is unimportant. But there are journeys of change that are real parallels between people using services and people working in services about getting and connecting with what recovery is about. Does that make sense as a kind of metaphor? And when I talk earlier about compassion and understanding for people who don't get it, I found that a really useful vehicle of developing that compassion. When someone says, this is nauseating political correctness, they're very early in that journey. They're not bad, they're not unhelpful, that's just where they are. When a service user says, I don't know what I need, you're the doctor, you tell me, they're not bad, they're not trying not to have a life, they're just very early in their journey of recovery. So the challenge is to expose to role models of hope, the challenge is to provide opportunities the person may feel brave enough to take, the challenge is to provide learning opportunities that suggest the possibility of a good future. The normal things one would try to do if someone is at that very helpless point on the spectrum, and similarly with mental health workers. Okay, so what I've seen some of you have got this document we did. I guess this was a kind of early effort to try and make that transition, bridge building. I mean, it's interesting you've positioned psychosocial rehabilitation as something of a bridge builder between the service user defined understanding of recovery and a professional set of expectations and construction of the role. And I think bridges are very important. There is something about valuing the old and not denigrating the old, and something about aspiring to the new but not idealizing the new. And that is normally the bridge building process is about holding the wisdom of the accrued experience of many, many years of running mental health services while still transforming. I was talking earlier about trying to hold that dialectic of both being proud and humble. And that's very challenging because people want to polarize. So when people are exposed to training around recovery ideas, for example, mental health workers will often feel very criticised. They'll feel, you're saying what I've done is harmful, toxic, has created dependency, has not been supporting the person to have a good life. And, you know, who wouldn't get pretty angry and defensive if they feel that's what's being communicated? So that the wisdom is holding that dialectic of both the challenge of change and also the pride of all the achievements that have been made and the journey that's been made so far. So when I'm doing work with mental health service workers, I'll often focus on the great achievements that have been made as a precursor to the further steps to go. So we want to make sure people don't get an impression that the person at the front thinks they're at point zero. They're not. They're at point somewhere in the middle, but there are more points to go. Okay. So an interesting little fact about this document, it's free to download, as some of you have, so thanks very much. It's the most downloaded document in the history of the Sainsbury Centre for Mental Health. And for me, I think I'm really encouraged by that, because I think it shows that there's a hunger to try and actually translate some of these ideas into reality. So I think in England, where we are now, is that we've moved beyond a rhetorical debate. The recovery agenda has captured the policy ground. It's also talked about in mental health services, so it's at a rhetorical or symbolic level present in the mental health system. The challenge is now making that a reality and actually transforming systems. And we're on that journey. Sometimes it's very demoralising because we're very early on that journey, it feels like, but we are on that journey, and there is a kind of desire to undertake that journey. So. Okay, so let's kind of move to what might be slightly more concrete. In England, there is a totem. Sorry, I don't know how is that totem. Totem. Sorry. Hey, a sort of symbol of evidence-based practice. There is a high value put on it, and so we have a series of clinical guidelines that tumble down on workers like me to say we should do this and that and the other, and here's the conveyor belt that we should do, and it's all very helpful for making sure we're not doing things that don't have an evidence base for them. So that's a reasonable thing to want to do. The challenge, of course, is about the evidence comes from groups of people. It comes from randomised controlled trials and systematic reviews and meta-analyses. And the challenge of that is that we don't treat groups, we work with individuals. And one person may not fit the profile of the group and may not benefit in the same way. So the real challenge, it seems to me, is to have a more sophisticated understanding of what evidence means. And one place we can go that we couldn't go 20 years ago is to the accounts of recovery that are now emerging internationally. And it's an amazing growth industry of people finding a voice and talking about their experiences of recovery. So if we go to that source of evidence, then we find a different kind of direction of travel that emerges. So when we ask people what supports their recovery and look at the narratives of recovery, as this Australian group did, they identify things like the central importance of hope, that it's about an identity moving beyond that of a mental patient, that it's about finding a way of finding meaning in an experience. One of the challenges, of course, is that the mental health system often translate that into insight, and that's not what it means. Insight is a particular predefined explanatory model of mental disorder that some people find very useful, and some people find an endless toxic cycle of disengagement from services, because whenever they go they want to tell me I'm ill and I'm not ill, and the conversation gets stuck at that level of discourse. So meaning in this research sense is not to do with insight. For some people it will be the same, for others it will be an entirely different explanatory model. And the real insight of the recovery approach is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what sense someone makes of their experience, in the sense that whether they're right or wrong, because what matters is whether it provides a way forward in life. If we were to sit every one of you down in the room together and probe all your beliefs, it would be very unlikely that any of you have beliefs that are fully rational. You know, we all have beliefs of superstitions, or believe in ghosts, or God, or things that we cannot, put on the table and say, I believe in this. We have beliefs that are beliefs. And that's not a bad thing, that's what it is to be a human. So the challenge